Welcome to the Up Your Average podcast, where Keith and Doug give no-nonsense advice to level up your life. So buckle up and listen closely to Up Your Average.
Let's get this party started. Hi, everybody. Hi, adventure seekers out there. Can you tell Keith is an adventure seeker? Keith, okay, just go ahead. I don't even know. What are you wearing? What's going on?
Now you were bragging about Will last week and the coats and all those sort of things, and so I was wearing my I was wearing my own coat today. It's the Renzo Gracie coat of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So
where does a guy get a whatever that Jiu-Jitsu coat is? Where do you get that?
Well, the Gracie family is out of Brazil, and so you would have to choose. I think you probably get one on eBay, but you'd have to choose to go get trained in one of their gyms to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay, all right. Well, I can't wait to see you walk around and drive into work, walk around the streets of Carmel with that thing. I mean, just the instant respect. And
what gives you respect is this part of the belt, Doug, or the coat is this white belt, right?
Ooh, look at that. What's that mean?
That means you know nothing. Yeah, that's a beginner. That means you're wrestling around with 4-year-olds and things.
I was going to say your mission today is to do a Google search, Kramer, Seinfeld, karate. You need to Google that and watch it. But it's the topic of the day, and the topic of the day is conceive risk. Don't ignore it. You chose this topic, Keith, and just even the word conceive, I think, is a great word. But talk to us a little bit about what you're thinking here.
I am not seeing your shared screen yet, Doug. There we go.
It'll pop up, and then I've got to do a couple things here. There we go, Keith. How's it looking now?
Yeah, that looks beautiful. I was when I was thinking of the title, I put I was like, the first time I put embrace risk, and that's hard for some folks to want to embrace risk. But I was trying to think of the right word, and conceive meant to take into one's mind. And I think you live in a state of risk. That risk is, I think, how we've defined it is an unexpected outcome, which is just life. But to take the risk into your mind, conceive it, allows you, I think, to live more fulfilled, more intentionally, maybe.
Well, I appreciate the care that you gave to the word, because when I saw conceive, I was thinking, okay, when I think of conceive, I think, the Shreves have 4 kids, give birth to some risk, but I did a chat GPT, what does conceive mean? Do you ever do that? And it was really helpful. Take it on, start it up, begin with, and it's great to get some clarity on because words matter. And so we're going to be talking about giving birth to risk today.
Well, and I think risk is what sets Gimbal apart. For those of you who are regulars with us, or if you've referred friends to us and they're trying to figure out why they might want to do business with Gimbal Financial, I think risk is really the thing. The risk is, it's an unexpected outcome. I put a bell curve here, and Doug, I have, in all honesty, tried to draw things on my computer many, many times in the past. Like, to draw a bell curve probably would have taken me 2 or 3 hours, but I went to Chat GPT and said, draw me a bell curve of life expectancy in the United States today. And so I could explain this to people, how risk works. And this is, the life expectancy of people. And essentially, when you see a bell curve, the hump in the middle, the camel's back, tells you that's where the bulk of everything happens, right? Like, that's the you could get into stats and talk about it at all, but the bulk of this happens between 70 and 85. It looks like the heart of life expectancy in the United States is between 70 and 85. So you could say, if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to go live, if I hit that range of 70 to 85, I better be darn intentional about living. I ought to be at whatever I'm intending to do. And there's not a lot of risk that you're not going to get there prior. You can see where that slope flattens out there. You can be 25 and live afraid. It's not wise, probability wise. You've got another 50 years before you need to maybe have some intentionality. But that's why I wanted to show it. Like life is unexpected, right? Like you don't know what it is. So life expectancy, the curve says that's what we hope for. We don't know what it is. But in fact, today is the day, right? Like today's the day I better live. That's all I wanted to show that. My host today, they had this sitting on their counter. I don't know if you can read this little piece of art.
I cannot read it. What's it say? For those driving, they can't read that either.
It says better an oops than a what if. I thought how appropriate
that's
for
really
today.
Good. That's really good.
So that's what's going on with my fancy suit coat today, Doug. Is my thought was my health will probably decline when I get over the top of that hump up there, right? Like when I'm heading towards the 80s, my health probably is going to drop in a span or two. But prior to that, while I'm still on the upswing there, I probably ought to do something to help with my healthy lifestyle. And the latest adventure for me is jiu-jitsu, as it helps both with body strength and the ability to get up off the ground. So that's the motivation for me to take the risk of such an uncommon sporting event at this age in life.
And then so just pressing into that a little bit, knowing you, Keith, I think one of the reasons, you tell me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why you would even do jiu-jitsu is in a way you were invited in. You knew somebody and they told you about it and you're like, hey, what if I did that? So there's that relationship component to it. You just don't drive down to Nashville just to drive down to Nashville and take a class. So you're stacking, learning a new skill. You're stacking relationships. You're stacking some adventure, and you're putting it all together. And I think that's called life.
And it is so multifaceted to get me to this place. It's unbelievable. I was recommended I take private lessons, Doug, because of the risk of injury. And your teacher is called Professor. My professor is from Brazil, Professor Reggie, and I've just struck a great friendship with him. And we have our schedule this week of when I'm supposed to be with him. And he called me Wednesday afternoon, a half hour before I was supposed to be there, and said, hey, I messed up my schedule. Why don't you just come to my class this evening? Well, that was a risky proposition to me, because the risk of me doing this is getting hurt, and the risk goes up when you're grappling with somebody that isn't very skilled, right? So like a beginner. And so the thoughts that I had to process in that risk is, do I blow Reggie off because I don't know these other people and I don't trust them? Or do I trust Reggie and embrace this situation? And when I got to the class, the next day after I did the class, he goes, what did you think about the class? I go, it was a lot, because I had to decide whether to blow you off or not, because when you're making those mental decisions on how to take risk, I wasn't going to risk my health with somebody I didn't know, but I had to ultimately trust Reggie. And so there's a lot going on with that.
Yeah. And stuff's going to happen.
Right.
Even under Professor Reggie, stuff's going to happen. A muscle's going to get pulled, and that pain is going to reveal what matters most. Let's see here, Keith. I'll try and get us to the next slide. There we go.
When I threw this out there, Doug, of an unexpected outcome. The Colts lose a game. The risk of that to me is my time, right? If I'm sitting on the sofa watching the Colts and I don't like to watch a losing event, I'm risking my time. If I'm a Colts player, it might be my career. If I'm a gambler, there's all kinds of risk involved with that or reward.
Yeah.
So if you're using that unexpected outcome, then you can see risk in a sporting event. I threw out there, you've got teenagers. As a parent, the risk of having teenagers, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the term helicopter parents, that comes to mind. I mean, there's a lot of control that parents perceive or they think they might have, or influence they think they might have over their kids and teenagers. And yeah, I mean, we have influence, but they're going to do things that are outrageous, and some of those things are going to happen publicly. And I think one of the important things to remember is to calm your heart and then aim for theirs. And normally those things can work themselves out.
Well, I think it's insane to try to live your life through your children. I think that's just if you've done that, I'm your friend still. I just don't think it's a good way to do it. However, we talked last week about the dangerous book for boys. I think if your kids don't do some outrageous things, then you as a parent probably aren't going to have a lot of stories to tell in the clubhouse to your friends. Like the more you can encourage your children to understand and conceive risk, the more as a family you're going to experience life, I think.
Don't tell mom, or as my mom used to say, don't tell me.
Well, back in the day where the street light was the parent in the afternoon hours, the saying was, "Look, mom, no hands." Right?
Now, tell me about the Inca Trail.
Well, you had mentioned being invited into things, and 2016, my daughter invited me into her adventure to hike the Inca Trail with her. And I didn't know anything about it. However, as I'm trying to decide, do I live or do I say, hey, I'm too old for that? Adventures with Charlie was a great book. And back when that book was written, they said they kept telling the author he was too old for this. And he was, I think, in his mid 50s. And so it impacted me. And so the Inca Trail was just a picture of something seemingly impossible from my point in life. And yet saying yes, because I conceived the risk, I consider the risk. What's the worst case scenario? What can happen?
That's just it right there. What's the worst case scenario? Better an oops than a what if. What's the worst case scenario here?
Yeah, and I accepted the worst case scenario. Literally, on that one, I didn't know at the time, and I had to sit down with Caitlin at a coffee shop in Cusco, Peru, and said, Caitlin, I wish I had known before the hike. I would have told you this because I believed it. I wish I would have known that there was a risk that I would die, and if I died, I wanted you to know that I lived doing what I wanted to do. And I can't think of a better risk in life as doing the things you're supposed to do. I mean, there was only a couple points on that I thought it was legitimately a risk at that point. I didn't know that in advance. But hey, in life, you don't really know what's really a risk until you're right upon it, And
I think that's one of the limiting factors of having so much information at our fingertips is we can find out the worst case scenario for someone else pretty quickly. And that could be the distraction or the limiting factor that keeps us from saying yes.
Right. And then ultimately, like for our role as investment advisors for you and your friends, the risk for us is to buy an investment. Like our reputation could conceivably be at stake when we buy an investment. There's all kinds of mental things that we have to go through if we buy a stock for someone.
So if we jump in the way back time machine to 2008, Keith and Doug, Keith and I went to a Starbucks during that time. And I remember we were sitting there and we were discussing the risk of stocks, and we were discussing the risks of management. And at that time, it was conceived, the the birth of Gimbal Financial and money management began out of a very painful stock market in 2008. And the idea was birthed of, well, why don't we just do this ourselves instead of having the mutual fund companies do it or the money managers do it? And so the risk was, and you told this to me, you said, if we do this, we're going to get fired a lot because the buck stops here. There's no one else to blame. And so that is the risk when we buy, and that's the risk that we decided to take on.
I think it is invigorating. I think it's probably as pure and honest as a financial advisor as you can be, because I can buy an investment for you and just tell you to hold on. And if I buy a diversified enough investment, eventually it'll probably come back. I can't tell you for sure it will. But what I've done by saying just buy and hold on is I've lowered your performance expectation, because the longer you have to hold something, the lower your rate of return is. I don't know if that makes sense, but really your rate of return, the more concise the period of time you hold it to get the rate of return, the higher return. And so the storyline that many of our peers in the industry do, just tell you to hold on. And there's times that it doesn't make sense to hold on because your rate of return is going to continue to suffer by holding on to an underperforming asset.
Keith, you dropped in, and this is a great time to talk about market risk. You must have done some research here.
Well, I've got a research staff at my fingertips, Doug, and so I use them to help me with this. And I picked the 10% number.
Yeah,
because 10% is probably a good number when you're thinking about asset allocating, a portfolio or a variety of things. And I just was thinking about a 10% drop in the Dow, because the Dow goes back as a farther measure of the market volatility than, say, the NASDAQ or S&P, and I wanted to use 100 years to consider it. And so in the last 100 years, in a single day, 10 times the Dow Jones has dropped 10% in a day. That's like a elevator free falling a floor or two, right?
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. And the problem with a 10% drop in a day is it's like throwing a boulder in a small pond. Those waves create other problems. And so a 10% drop disrupts the psyche of the public, right? So you create a confusion that is probably not going to be healed immediately if you have that kind of a day. That day's called a bummer.
And so we lived a few of those just 2 years ago.
Well, I don't know if we had a 10% drop in a day a few years ago, but we had 10% drops 4 times in 2022.
In seasons.
Yeah. So if you look at a chart of 2022, there were 4 times that it rallied back up, right? But then it gave it back. So that's 40% in the 2022 calendar year, and so that's a lot of distress on your psyche as well. And so I'm just pointing out how these things can affect you. And in any given year, there's about a 50% chance you're going to get a 10% drop. So what that says, if I'm conceiving risk, I need to think, okay, let's pick $1 million because it's easy math. If I put $1 million in the market today, am I okay with tomorrow it being 900,000? Because in the last 100 years, 10 times that's happened.
So Keith, there we go. So investing incurs risk. You're gonna have some risk, and so what do you do with it?
Well, I was typing that first bullet point when I was saying when you come out of the money market and put it at risk, you put it in an uncertain place. I said you leave a safe haven, and all this technology, it corrected me that a safe haven is redundant. A haven is a safe place. It's a port. And so
I like your efficiency. And goodness, the most risk occurs as soon as you click the mouse to make that buy.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a rocket leaving the launch pad.
That's the exact picture I had, Doug. I was thinking, remember when we took our boys down to the Cape Canaveral years ago?
I sure do.
Yeah. So the mission control or whatever has done all the math. They've done all the decision making prior to hitting the button. I don't know if they hit a button.
We've said, what is the risk? Yeah. The downside. Yep.
And are we ready to hit the button to buy? So like if we buy an investment for our friends and clients, it isn't, let's lick our finger and put it up in the air kind of thing. We've already defined the risk, right? Like what we're willing to accept on this decision.
Yeah, and we don't light up camels stressed out, when we're making that decision either. But it is one where that is the most aggressive time is when you hit.
Yeah, wouldn't you say that we would suspect, because we're looking not to make a full, say if it's a 10% investment, probably not going to generally do that all in one push of the button. We may do 3 buys to get to a 10% position. But the reason we do it that way is we know the first time we hit it, there may be a 50% chance we're wrong.
Yeah. No, doesn't it feel great to be able to know that and admit it?
It does.
50% chance that you're wrong.
Yeah. Wow. So say we go. I didn't put down the math on this, but if we do the $1 million number and we're trying to get to a 10% position, and we buy half of that or 5%, we're putting 50,000 of your $1 million at risk, right? And we're probably not going to let it drop 10%. But if we did let that first buy drop 10%, we're risking 5,000 of your $1 million is how we evaluate risk. That's the best way I can explain the math to you on that. And so we understand when we hit the buy button, we're risking $5,000 of your money, and we don't take that lightly.
And this is true in every aspect of life. I can remember when my wife had to have surgery, and it just wasn't going well at the hospital we were at. And so I called a good friend of ours, Keith, and I was tempted to hold. I was in a freezing pattern. I didn't know really what was going on, except I knew it wasn't quite right. And so I was tempted to hold. And do you know what he told me? He said, "Get the heck out of there." He said, "I'm going to call another doctor and I'm going to have a place ready for you." And he did. And so we sold, and then we moved our location, and it was a great decision to do that. And so these types of things, investing, life, your health, there are times to hold, but then there's times to get the heck out of there. And a lot of times you might need the help of a friend to trade off their courage to do it.
That was my lesson in jiu-jitsu. Besides the twisting of hands yesterday, Professor Reggie told me that when you find yourself in a lost situation, first you need to stop, then sit down, then take in food. Like if you're in the woods or something, take in food. Like mentally, he was saying, think about it and then act. And that's a lot of those things we're doing proactively in the decision process. But I think that's the same process is important for all aspects of life.
Yeah. And so in managing portfolios, we like to spread out the risk. We like to look for places that have some momentum to them. That way we're not fishing in a pond that's just, keeps going down and down. And patience is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned in the last 10 years is to have patience. And having patience might mean holding, and it might mean holding in the safe haven or in the haven and staying in the haven for a long period of time.
I've learned so much about how patience and how the stock market works in combination in the last 5 years that it's humbling to consider. I didn't know it the first years of my career, but to understand, for example, if a stock launches off of the launch pad, the temptation is, and many of you may call us, "Hey, can we buy XYZ?" after it's already launched and it's in the news. The answer is you probably want to be patient with it and not buy it right then, because it is, from a mathematical perspective, it's moved away from the bell curve. It needs to regress. The middle of a bell curve is generally called the mean, the average. It needs to back up and come back closer to the norm. And so the patience in that is, if a investment launches off, if it's going to do it for a long period of time, it's probably going to come back a little bit and give us a chance to get in without jumping in and taking all that risk initially, where your emotions would send you flying into it. And it's a fun thing to know.
It's a good thing to know. All kinds of risky scenarios, event-driven declines, personal liquidity crisis. That's the one that the internet can't really solve for. Is it can give you all the data, but if stuff's going on in your personal life, it's probably a great time to hit the pause button.
And I wrote these bullet points here, Doug, as an individual, not globally. If you've got a portfolio and 9/11 happened, that's an event-driven decline, and you probably need to step back and even ask us or think about that, because those kind of event-driven declines sometimes last longer than you might think. Personal liquidity just says that, hey, if you've got to cash in your portfolio, you've got a certain level of risk if all of a sudden you decide you want to move and buy a house and you sell things. And single stock risk, that one has really been on my thought process the last few days.
This year, you've really developed some thoughts that were sparked really out of the 2008 market. You've developed some thoughts and strategies that have turned into action on the single stock risk. That's been really cool to see. We have more tools available to us today than ever.
Yeah, I saw Kuros Pharmaceutical or Therapeutics yesterday. I don't know if you saw that. That stock dropped 77% yesterday, and I see those kind of stocks weekly, and they remind me of what we've mentioned. William O'Neill taught us that all stocks are speculative, but the other part of single stock risk, an unexpected outcome, is your stock takes off. Like we've talked about the downside, right, Doug? Managing a stock on the upside is equally as difficult, right? Like what do you do? Because it's like getting a big fish on the fishing line.
I like those scenarios, Keith. I really like that scenario.
It's to have a winner.
Yes, it's so great to have a winner.
Yeah, it is. And the temptation a lot of times is to make a big winner a small winner and just take a small gain, right?
Absolutely. Or to hold it until kingdom come. And what tends to happen is, as it accelerates up, it accelerates down at the same slope at some point in time. If you want examples of that, you could look at the stocks that shot up during COVID and see where
what I was thinking of. Zoom Video or Moderna. They both probably dropped 95%. But with that, we can help you with strategies if you do have that. Like for example, you can make incremental decisions. You don't have to buy and sell everything at once. I had a position that went my way recently, Doug, and what I did was I put a sell to sell 10 shares. Just not to sell everything, just to get me to take a profit and be okay.
Good for you.
Yeah, it wasn't a big decision, just a small incremental thing. Sector risk, depending on where you're, if you've worked in a particular industry or something, you might be really heavy in a sector, and you may have the best stock in that sector, but if that sector turns and goes against you, a rising tide lifts all ships, as does what's the opposite of a rising tide? An outward tide. So
a hole in the boat. Talk to us about liability.
Well, risky situations, and I was thinking more of financial planning with this, Doug, is that your portfolio is the fuel for you living life. Whether you're going to go do jujitsu, you're going to climb a mountain, you're going to go bike ride, and you're going to go on vacation with your family. The day-to-day decisions, generally, you've hired us to make those for you. What you need to think about is, how am I going to use these resources to fuel life to the fullest? And I was thinking about liability risk, because one of the things we haven't talked about in a while is the benefit of something like a umbrella policy, or the different types of risks you might have in life and how you prepare yourself for those, because we could get the best returns in the world for you. And if you haven't closed all the back doors to your financial situation, it doesn't really matter what you do on the market or in the investments, because those backdoor things they could present higher unexpected results than anything we do.
Yeah. And checking those boxes just helps you feel better about whatever decision you're in. It's the snow tires on a sports car in the winter. Keith, how do we manage risk? What would you say?
Well, I stole that from Stephen Covey there, start with the end in mind. But I think we said it already in our conversation that we don't take a position lightly. When we know when we're going in it, if we realize there's a good chance we're going to be wrong when we go into it, we have to know when we're coming out, even before we hit the buy button, before we hit the launch button.
Yeah, that's very true. Right or wrong on a trade, tease that out a little bit.
Well, most of us have been taught that we need to get 90% in school, for 80 to 90% from schooling. Maybe we need to be a B or A student or whatever, and to be 50%, which I just said, is a lot of self-esteem. And so to go into that knowing I could be right or wrong on this trade, instead of waiting and getting emotional about it or trying to rationalize why I'm in this trade when it's going against me, that's just a horrible decision to think you know something more than the market, because the market is infinitely bigger than you and it has no concern for your well-being.
Well, as Jerry Maguire's mentor, live to fight another day. I can't remember how Jerry Maguire's mentor said it, but it was something like that. And that is so true. And Keith and I both, we really appreciate you listening along with us. Keith, we've been doing these since 2020, if not maybe tail end of 2019. And for some of you, you've been with us the whole journey on these things. And our hope is that you pick up something that you can put into action today, and that you can live courageously. It's possible. It's possible to have that adventure. And I'm reading this book right now, The Comfort Crisis. There's a lot out there to keep us comfortable. And the beauty of taking some risk is you're going to know yourself more, and you're going to have some great adventure.
You want me to jump in on that, Doug?
Sure.
So Reggie was giving me the sales pitch on an uncomfortable situation yesterday after I got done with my workout, and I went to do cryotherapy yesterday.
Yeah. Nice work.
140, I think it was 145 degrees below zero for 2 minutes. Yeah. And it was uncomfortable, but it was a hilarious experience. And I think it was very therapeutic as well. But the more comfortable you are, probably the more uncomfortable you're going to be because of that. So I'd encourage you all to conceive your risk and live life to the fullest, whatever that looks like for you.
We'll see you all next week, okay?
Bye-bye.